All right, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick's on the Power. So I wanted to make a video about Shawn Rhoden being the oldest Mr. Olympia in the history of the Mr. Olympia competition. Now, Shawn Rhoden won the 2018 Mr. Olympia at the age of 43 years old, an accomplishment only shared with one other bodybuilder, and that was Chris Dickerson, who won the Mr. Olympia back in 1982, also at the age of 43. Now, Shawn Rhoden won the Mr. Olympia this year at just a couple months older than Chris Dickerson, making Shawn officially the oldest bodybuilder to ever win it. But there are two bodybuilders in history to have won it at the age of 43 years old. Now, I think there's quite a few similarities between Shawn and Chris. The fact that Shawn and Chris both were runner-up at the Mr. Olympia prior to winning it. Chris Dickerson was runner-up at the 1980 Mr. Olympia to Arnold Schwarzenegger. In 1981, Chris Dickerson was runner-up to Franco Colombo, then finally winning it in 1982, but not defeating the current Mr. Olympia. So when he took second in 1980, Arnold would not go on to compete in the 1981 Mr. Olympia. When he took second in 1981, Franco would not go on to compete in the 1982 Mr. Olympia, kind of leaving the 82 Olympia title wide open. So while Shawn and Chris were both 43 when they won the Olympia, I think what Shawn Rhoden was able to do was much more impressive than what Chris Dickerson was able to do, because Shawn Rhoden took out the 7-time champion, whereas Chris Dickerson kind of came in where there was a wide opening for anybody to win the Olympia. And who else would it have really been since Chris Dickerson was second at the previous two Mr. Olympias. And then unlike Shawn Rhoden, the following year, 1983, Chris Dickerson would not return to defend his title. He kind of had always set out to win the Mr. Olympia, and once he finally won it, he kind of rode off into the sunset, even though he would return in 1984 to take 11th at the Olympia. But he would not defend his title in 83 and would become the first one-time Mr. Olympia champion. Prior to Chris, you had Arnold, who won 7 times. You had Franco, who won twice. You had Frank Zane, who won 3 times. You had Sergio Oliva, who won 3 times, and you had Larry Scott, who won twice. So it was a pretty historic moment for Chris Dickerson to win the Olympia. Number 1, being the oldest guy at the time. Number 2, being the first gay bodybuilder to win the Mr. Olympia. And number 3, of course, being the first one-time Mr. Olympia. Now, a lot of people have criticized Shawn Rhoden, and they say that they think he is going to be similar to Chris in that regard, and that this was kind of a one-off thing, and that next year he won't be able to defend his title. And somebody else potentially will be the new Mr. Olympia next year, assuming that Phil doesn't return, because recently in an interview with RX Muscle, Phil said probably not in response to the question, will you be competing at the 2019 Mr. Olympia? So a lot of people ask me if I think that Shawn Rhoden will be able to retain his title in 2019, and honestly, I think yes, especially considering the fact that Phil Heath is not returning. And even if Phil did return, I think that it would be highly likely that Shawn Rhoden could defend his title. So assuming there's no Phil and no Kai, the 2019 Mr. Olympia would most likely be Rolly Winkler, who took 3rd this year, as the main contender for Shawn Rhoden's title. And I could see a guy like Rolly taking the Mr. Olympia title from Shawn, but I could also see Shawn just as likely defending that title. So I would not write off Shawn Rhoden as being a one-off Mr. Olympia. I certainly think it's possible for Shawn to win multiple Mr. Olympias, certainly more than one. So personally, I think Shawn is a welcome change to the Mr. Olympia. He's a good face for the sport. And no matter what anybody says, Shawn Rhoden won the 2018 Mr. Olympia fair and square, hands down, no argument. It is what it is. Shawn Rhoden is the 2018 Mr. Olympia. It was not just because of his abs. He was the better bodybuilder on that day. End of story. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Nick Strength and Power, signing out.